Okay, excellent. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're really humbled by the attendance. There's a lot of interest in this topic, and it's great to see so much interest. I'm going to be talking about what is a northern Piedmont prairie. I put northern in there because Piedmont prairies are a huge topic, and I'm definitely not an expert on all of Piedmont prairies by any means. There might be some other more knowledgeable folks attending who can comment. I know we'll have Devin Floyd at the end. Hang on, let me add something else here. So this talk is going to be about northern Piedmont prairies, and I think they're especially interesting because they've received a lot less research attention than grasslands further south in the Piedmont. So to outline my talk, I'm going to start with a brief introduction to the Clifton Institute. I know we have quite a few people on the talk who have not been here before, so I'll let you know a little bit about us. Then I'll get into the history and extent of grasslands in the Piedmont. Then I'll talk about our plant surveys that we did this summer. That's the core of the presentation. And then I'll talk about conservation and restoration solutions for northern Piedmont prairies. So the Clifton Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have 4 full-time staff. We're funded by individual donations and foundation grants. And we have 3 program areas: restoration, education, and research. Our mission is to inspire the next generation of environmental stewards to learn about the ecology of the Northern Virginia Piedmont and to conserve native 900-acre property. Okay, the music's gone. We have a 900-acre property north of Warrenton, Virginia, which is protected permanently under a conservation easement. It's a snapshot of some of our programs. These are from education programs from 2019, so you don't see any masks in these photos. These are pictures from summer camp where we had students studying our wildflower, our native garden, and finding out what kinds of insects were visiting our native planting. And then in the bottom right is an example of an activity where we were learning about seed dispersal. So I'm admitting some here, where the kids were putting different kinds of seeds in front of a fan and measuring how far they went. So this is the kind of education programs we do here at Clifton. And last year we had about 1,500 kids come through. We also do land management and restoration work here. This is a picture of a prescribed burn that we did last year at Clifton Institute. And we're doing a big restoration experiment. We're restoring a 110-acre fescue pasture to native. Someone's still playing music. I tried muting everybody.
We'll cover up my mistakes on this. I'll try to pick it and narrate it to these folks.
Give me a sec. I'm going to try to mute the music. I don't know where it's coming from. There we go. So like I was saying, we do restoration and land management experimentally here at the Clifton Institute, and we spread the word on what works and what doesn't at workshops for landowners. We also do research, conservation biology research, and next year the focus is going to be on American kestrels. So we'll be tagging American kestrels with GPS transmitters to find out what kinds of fields they forage in, and so that we can better manage our working landscapes, pastures, and row crops for American kestrels, which are declining across their range in the Northeast. This shows the location of the Clifton Institute in central Fauquier County. Okay, now on to the grasslands of the Piedmont and their history. So the Piedmont is a huge region that stretches from Alabama to New Jersey, and in general it's boxed in by the Appalachians on the west and by the coastal plain on the east. And in our area, the Blue Ridge Mountains are on the western border and the Fall Line is on the eastern border. The bedrock is usually granite with a clayey soil, although there's a lot of variation in that. And in our area, we have plenty of grasslands. I had somebody say, well, you know, why are you worried about grasslands? We've got grasslands everywhere. And I'm worried about them because the vast majority of grasslands in our area are dominated by non-native cool season pasture grasses. So this is the typical northern Piedmont scene here, and you can see a lot of fescue and orchard grass. So both of these grasses were introduced for forage, and they're good forage, but they are really aggressive and outcompete native plants. And this is what a fescue field looks like in the winter if you don't graze it or mow it. And you see it flops over, and it's not really much good for quail or other ground birds. But you can see in the back there's a patch of Indian grass, and it's standing straight up, providing seeds and cover for wintering birds, and that's a native grass. So I started getting interested in what's happening in the back corners of all these fields in the Piedmont. And at my, we've lived here about 6 years now. When we bought our land, we had plenty of fescue and not much interesting in terms of native grasses. But I looked across the driveway at my neighbor's field, and this is what I thought. So it was an amazing patch of Indian grass. And then I looked closer later, so in the spring, and found some amazing flowers. So pasture thistle, which is an uncommon plant, plus some beautiful mistflower, wild bergamot. And there are even 2 orchid species growing over there, plus the hyssop leaf skullcap, Maryland golden aster, downy lobelia, and butterfly weed. And this is just at my neighbor's place. So it really got me thinking, what's hiding out in these grasslands in our area? And then I went to work, and so I found similarly a really cool patch of native grasses and flowers, including slender lespedisa and early goldenrod. So now at home and at work, there are some really interesting grasslands. So it really got me thinking, how widespread are these? What's the history of them? And what's their conservation status? So before I go any further, should we call these prairies or grasslands? This is actually a contentious topic. And some people say that prairies really should be reserved for the Midwest. But if you look in the flora of Virginia, which is the Bible, in our community, it says a prairie is an herbaceous community dominated by warm season perennial grasses and often containing species that occur in Midwestern grasslands. So it doesn't say anything about the size of it. So at the moment, I'm okay with saying prairie or grassland. I'd be interested to hear what anybody else thinks. So in the Piedmont, there is a lot of debate about how widespread these habitats were and how natural they were, the level of involvement by people in maintaining them. And I'm not going to get into that in a lot of detail. That could be a whole talk by itself, but I will cover some of the basics. So we can look at historical maps like this one that John Lederer produced in 1670. And if you look carefully, hopefully you can see my mouse. So you can see it says Carolina, and it also says Virginia. And in the middle there, it says Savannah, and that is the Shenandoah Valley. And the yellow arrow points to some grasslands at the headwaters of the Rappahannock River. So in 1670, there was some evidence, at least based on this explorer, of grasslands in our region. And this is a neat photo from the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. And I just think it's a cool illustration. So you can see row crops on the right, but you can also see a strip of grass that's left along the roadside. And this is a picture from 1939. And it just suggests that, these roadsides, which a lot of people consider to be degraded anthropogenic habitats, may actually have some old communities growing on them. And in our surveys, we found some really diverse roadsides that actually didn't have that many non-native plants. So, but how do we get grasslands growing in such a wet region? So we get about 40 inches of rain on the Piedmont here, a little bit less in the northern Piedmont than in the southern Piedmont, but it's still plenty of rain. And anybody that lives in this region knows that leave a field alone, it'll turn into trees. So it requires a lot of disturbance to maintain these habitats. And the disturbance has been mainly historically from fires and from grazing animals. So it's a paper from 2012, which did some modeling, and it looked at fire scars, which that's what the bottom picture shows, scars on trees from periodic fires. And it looked at climate data and used that information to build a model to predict how frequent fires came through our region. And you can see it predicts every 4 to 6 years. We would have had fires here from 1650 to 1850. That's frequent enough to maintain some grasslands for sure. And these fires are not all natural by lightning strikes. Probably they're definitely Native American fires, and also European settlers would have played a role in these fires. And bison, this is another somewhat contentious issue, but there are some pretty convincing accounts from explorers in the 1600s. Samuel Argall apparently saw some bison near the Potomac. There are also some bones down in the southern Piedmont of Virginia of bison, and these are some of the references down below. Let me see if I can see what people are saying in the chat there. Yeah, so I don't think I can turn up my microphone sensitivity, but I'll just do my best to speak slowly here. So the general consensus is, based on very little information, that probably in our area we had a lot of savannas or woodlands, not necessarily giant open grasslands, but probably widely spaced oaks and hickories with a really diverse understory of grasses and flowers. And this is a picture of such a savanna from Fort Pickett, and this is a military base where military exercises lead to and it's been that way for decades. And it's a super diverse site. And this may be what these habitats would have looked like a long time ago. So what has been done so far? So there have been some really nice surveys done at Difficult Creek Natural Area Preserve in Halifax County, which is a Department of Conservation and Recreation reserve that includes Piedmont Prairie that grows in a Powerline. And in their surveys, they found 108 species of plants in a 10 by 10 meter plot. And this has just been published, and that is the most diverse vegetation plot in the entire state. So they're very diverse, which just shows how important they are. And in addition to species richness, they have endemic species. So the tall barbarous buttons, the one I'm showing on the left, this plant is only found in a couple of counties in the southern Virginia Piedmont and across the border in North Carolina in the Piedmont. So this plant requires full sun, and it's found nowhere else. So to me, that is the strongest kind of evidence that shows that we had at least open savannas and maybe grasslands in the area. Michaud's sumac is another one that it has a bigger range. It's found from Florida to Virginia, but it's the biggest population of this plant is at Fort Pickett, which I just talked about. So again, that plant didn't just come from nowhere. So it's been here probably a really long time. Another reason why Piedmont grasslands are worthy of our attention is because they are a focus of a lot of endangered species. So 52 state listed or globally listed species in Virginia are found in Piedmont grasslands or rock outcrops. And that's by far more than any other habitat type in the state. So they're a focus of threatened species as well as diversity. These habitats are not just important for plants. So in smaller fields, declining species like yellow-breasted chats, prairie warblers, and field sparrows are found. And in larger grasslands in our area, we have American kestrels, grasshopper sparrows, eastern meadowlarks, and American bumblebees, all of which are declining. The conservation status of birds is better known than insects, but it appears that American bumblebee and Sanderson's bumblebee, perhaps some others, are on their way out, and they're hanging on in these important habitats. So driving around the Piedmont of Virginia, you don't see a lot of native grasslands. Instead, you see a lot of urban areas, you see a lot of pastures and row crops, and you see a lot of forest. And so there has been a huge change in the extent and quality of this habitat over time. So what about those northern Piedmont prairies? We know there's a study from the south, but what's known about the prairies in our area? Gary Fleming from the Department of Conservation and Recreation did surveys at 6 sites on northern Piedmont grasslands, and he found 119 species of plants in just 6 sites. That's pretty impressive. And Smith and Lobstein, both from the Virginia Native Plant Society, have been studying deep cut at Manassas Battlefield, and in one of their 1x1 meter plots, they found 25 species of plants, which is pretty nice as well. So there's been a little bit of research, but there has not been a comprehensive study of the plants of grasslands in the northern Piedmont. So that's where we come in. So our questions were, what plants are characteristic of northern Piedmont grasslands? What is the conservation status of native grasslands in our region? And how should we protect and restore these habitats? And I certainly couldn't get an answer to these questions by myself, so I teamed up with a really great team of folks. Leighton Reed is a professor at Virginia Tech, and 3 students from his lab, Jordan Kasha, Michael Beal, and Kathleen Lewis, all worked on this project. We also received funding from the Virginia Native Plant Society for this project, and we were able to hire Jared Durrell as a botanist for the entire summer. And finally, Devin Floyd is a collaborator of ours from the Center for Urban Habitats, and I'm including data from 2 of his sample plots in this presentation. So this is a map of our sample sites. We surveyed 38 sites in 5 counties: Rappahannock County, Culpeper County, Fauquier County, Prince William, and Fairfax. And these sites, as you can see, cover a big area. We found them in a whole bunch of different ways. We were recommended by Gary Fleming we resurveyed as many of his as we could get access to, and whichever ones had not been paved over. We also talked to other folks who had noticed nice native grasslands. And we also found quite a few just by driving down the road and seeing a rose pink blooming or something like that. So it's pretty ad hoc, but that's fine. I mean, the goal here was to find the best grasslands we could in our region, and that's what we did. I'm sure there are more out there, like I say, like the fact that we found a really nice site at my house and another one where I work seems pretty coincidental. So if you know of a nice site with lots of nice native plants, please let us know. So we had the following hypotheses. Northern Piedmont grasslands will be diverse, but they will have substantial non-native components. So I didn't really know what to expect, but I was a little bit skeptical that these were going to be super exciting habitats just because they were at my house and they were where I worked, but we'll see about that. We predicted that old fields would be more diverse and have more native species than Powerline clearings. We predicted that soil compaction would be negatively related to native plant diversity. And we predicted that sites with more basic soils and igneous geology would have more diverse plant communities. So at those 38 sites, we used a 50 by 2 meter plot survey method. So we laid out a 50 by 2 meter area with measuring tapes. And within that area, we did 5 1 by 1 meter plots. So this is in the photo, you can see what we're doing. And in those 1 by 1 meter plots, we counted every single plant species and estimated percent cover of each plant species in the 1 by 1 meter quadrats. In addition to that, we added on any species that we saw and the rest of the plot to the total number of species. And then, well, it was pretty hard in the field. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the team who did that. I was out there a few of the days, but the team were very tough in the sun and the ticks. But the really hard work, I think, actually was keying out everything that we found, all the dicanthelium grasses, like this picture of this specimen. And Jared Gorell worked really hard on that, and we were thankful. We were lucky to get help from Gary Fleming and Johnny Townsend, the real experts at DCR as well. So in terms of composition, we found 433 species of plants in our surveys, and an amazing 84% of them were native. So this is really diverse and a lot of native plants. So this is pretty cool. And our results were somewhat different from Gary Fleming from his surveys, and that's kind of what you would expect when he sampled just 6 sites and we did 38 sites. And he surveyed a couple that we couldn't get back to. So 2 of the dominant plants that he found were the purple 3-on grass and orange coneflower, and we only found those at 1 or 2 of our sites. So this is a key graph. So on the x-axis, we have the number of native species, and on the y-axis, we have the exotic species importance score. So the exotic species importance takes into account the number of non-native species that we found, but also the percent cover. So if there are a bunch of different non-native species and they have a lot of, they covered a lot of the area, then they get a high exotic species importance score. So you can see these are all of our sample sites, and there are more than 38 here because we sampled a lot of them twice, early in the season and late in the season. And you can see that there are a lot of diverse plots, and you can see that 6 of them really stand out. So these 6 points had very high native diversity and very few non-native plants. So these were the ones we are most excited about. And I'm not revealing the localities, the exact localities, because there's some rare plants found in these sites and we have to be careful. But there are, these are all Powerline clearings, 1 from Culpeper County, 1 from Prince William County, and 1 each from Fairfax and Fauquier. I should also note that my neighbor's field and the Clifton fields came up as pretty good sites. They were next in line in terms of number of native plant species, although you can see they had a higher exotic species importance. Now, this is kind of a busy table, but it's important. So this shows how our sites compare to all the other sites in the state. And our sites are shown in yellow. And this is for the 100 square meter plot. So that 50 by 2 meter plot, the first one there, Prince William Powerline, we found 93 species in that 50 by 2 meter plot. And that's number 4 in the state of all the vegetation plots that have been done. So all of these sites shown in yellow are in the top 1% of vegetation plots that have been done in the state. That's 4,524 vegetation plots. Now, those plots have been done in all sorts of habitats, all the way from the coast to the mountains, wetlands, forests. So some of them are maybe not that comparable, but the fact that these Piedmont grasslands are showing up at the top is really interesting. You can see Difficult Creek, that was the site I mentioned earlier in the southern Piedmont. It's the #1 site in the state, but right behind it is the Prince William Powerline that we sampled. And this extremely high diversity is also shown in the 1 by 1 square meter plots, and at the other level of diversity, it's actually shown even stronger. So we had really exceptional counts at a small scale, 1 by 1 meter. And now I just want to show you some pictures of these fantastic sites. This is the Prince William County Powerline, where we found 93 species of plants, and you can see wavy leaf asters and gray goldenrods in bloom. The rock type here is basalt, so it's an igneous intrusion that came in, and it's just a really cool site. This is a Powerline in Culpeper County. This is our #2 site with 84 species of plants found there. And it really doesn't look like much, you know, driving down the road, but when you start looking closely, it's an amazing place. This is a Powerline in Fauquier County with some awesome grass leaf blazing star, another really diverse site with 76 species of plants. And the Clifton Institute, like I said, it's just behind the pack of the amazing 6 sites with 79 species. And this is found on a totally different rock type with different soil chemistry. And this is just a picture of what it looks like in the early season and also later in the season when the little blue stem is. So, and similar to the southern Piedmont prairies, it's not just about the diversity. So the northern Piedmont prairies also have a selection of rare and threatened species. This is probably the flagship species for northern Piedmont prairies, the Torres mountain mint. This plant is known from about 30 sites globally, and several of those are in our region, and Virginia is the stronghold of this species. There are 4 other sun-loving rare plants that occur in these habitats. Hairy hedge nettle, American blue hearts, purple milkweed, and stiff goldenrod. And we found 3 out of 4 of these in our surveys. Also, we had 2 near threatened species. I call them near threatened. They don't quite make the cut for rare in the state, but they're close. So Johnny Townsend said he wasn't quite sure what to do with the white leaf aster. I know the yellow nodding lady's tresses was recently delisted. So these are 2 other really uncommon and interesting plants that we found in our sites. And the yellow nodding lady's tresses was the first record for Culpeper. Now this is for the hardcore botanists out there. I won't spend much time on this, but we found a whole bunch of new county records. This is not a complete list, but we're still working on that. And I thought it'd be nice to walk people through the typical species that we find in these habitats. I think for one thing, it's just really cool, the diversity and the beauty of all these flowers and grasses. They're really neat. But it's also relevant because when we are doing restoration projects and wildflower meadow plantings in our area, they'll have the most conservation benefit if we're able to match them as close as we can to the native grasslands that have occurred without anybody planting them. So here are 4 of the most common species we found: dogbane, narrowleaf mountain mint, slender bush clover, and hyssop-leaf skullcap. And there's an asterisk by hyssop-leaf skullcap because that indicates a plant for which there is no source of seeds from commercial seed sellers, or they're just difficult to find. So it's pretty hard to plant a Piedmont prairie in the appropriate way if you really are a purist. You want to try to recreate one of these habitats. It's hard to do if you can't get the seeds of the thing. And the hyssop-leaf skullcap was the 4th most common flower we saw. So. Here's some more: 2 goldenrods, a tick trefoil, and a ragwort. Again, hard to get seeds or impossible to get seeds of the balsam ragwort. Green milkweed, a really neat and different milkweed, is widespread at our sites and nobody sells it. So another one to think about. Calico aster as well, and hyssop-leaf thoroughwort. Some other interesting species: world milkweed. This is a miniature tiny milkweed that we found in a couple of our clay hardpan sites with diabase bedrock. Curlyheads is another one of those species that prefers the clay hardpans, and it's a gorgeous clematis, you can see. Again, no source of seeds of that. Maryland golden aster was one that we found on sandstone sites. It's a beautiful flower, kind of difficult to get seeds for that too. And some pink ones, so pasture thistle. So you probably have heard that not all thistles are evil. So this is a native thistle, and it's our uncommon native thistle. So we don't see it in many sites, but in the higher quality ones, we tend to find pasture thistle. Rose pink is another beautiful pink plant that actually is quite widespread. We found it in a lot of our sites. Okay, so that's all the flowers, or at least the most common flowers. And in terms of grasses, we found little bluestem and Indian grass in all of our sites. Not all, almost every site. We had little bluestem, Indian grass. So those really are characteristic. If you see these grasses while you're driving down the road, you might have a nice site. And you never know. I mean, one of our nice sites was right behind the 7-Eleven in Culpeper County. So it can be in sort of an unassuming spot. You never know. Another one is Elliott's bluestem, and this is a beautiful grass that's kind of like a bird of paradise. And deep pennant grass is another one that we found very commonly. Sedges, don't forget the sedges. This is where my eyes usually start to glaze over in terms of trying to identify these things. I started out as a bird watcher, but they're pretty cool too. And Bush's sedge was thought to be pretty uncommon in our region, but we found it in a bunch of sites It seemed to be pretty much everywhere. And the fuzzy wuzzy sedge, that is the official common name. So that's pretty cool as far as sedges go. So non-native species, of course, we had them, although I was pleasantly surprised by how little of them we found. These are the most important ones: Chinese bush clover, small carpet grass, also known as joint head grass, Japanese honeysuckle, tall fescue, and oxeye. So those are our compositional results. And now I'll briefly walk you through our statistical analyses when we looked at the characteristics of the sites to see how they were related to the native plant diversity. So we looked at geology. That's an online data source. So we looked at rock type. We looked at soil pH, again, from an online resource. We collected a bunch of soil samples, but those have not been analyzed yet. That'll really be the final word on that. But this is a first look at it. We also looked at soil compaction and soil type, or landform. So that's natural soils versus anthropogenic soils like fill dirt. And we did that based on soil cores. So for geology, on the y-axis, we have the number of native plant species, and on the x-axis, we have rock type. And you can see with the three groupings of rock types, there's no real pattern. So it was not just a story of igneous rocks being the very best sites. So our hypothesis on that was wrong. And then on the left, you can see the different kinds of rocks. pH, we also predicted that more basic sites would have higher diversity, but that was not the case based on this pH data set, at least. And we were wrong about this one too. So we thought old fields would probably be ideal, you know, if they just get mowed once a year or something. But powerline clearings were significantly more diverse in terms of native plants than old fields. Also anthropogenic landforms, so fill dirt was actually better than natural soil. That's a pretty crazy result, think about it. Also, highly compacted soils tended to be more diverse than not compacted. So what does all this mean? Powerline clearings really stand out in this research as being important sites, highly diverse, top 1% sites in the state. So the disturbance in most powerline clearings seems to be ideal for maintaining these native grasslands. And most of these power lines, they get mowed once a year and that's it. No cows grazing, no hay cutting, no overgrazing, you know. And apparently this once a year disturbance is ideal for native plant diversity in prairies in our area. And I think this is despite the other factors. So highly compacted soil and fill dirt being piled on top of these power lines. You know, so these plants are pretty adaptable in some ways. They can deal with disturbance, and apparently they can deal with soil compaction and soil alteration as long as they just get mowed once a year. And also if they've been there for a long time. And in contrast to our hypotheses, we found high quality grasslands on a variety of soil types and chemistries, not just the clay hardpan soils over igneous rocks. And clay hardpan soils are interesting though, because they are impermeable, so you can't have a drain field for your septic tank. So when it rains, it becomes a lake, and then that water evaporates, and then it becomes a rock solid clay, like dry clay. So those are really intense conditions that are not very good for growing trees. And so they tend to support grasslands or savannas. Okay, the threats that we identified. This was another surprise. So I predicted that invasive species would probably be the worst threat to these habitats. But at least this season, we found that herbicides are causing a lot of trouble. There's been a shift in the last few years from mowing once a year to using herbicides to control woody plants and power line clearings. In some sites, it's not having much of an impact, but in others it is. And this is one which was a population of stiff goldenrod, which is a state rare plant. And it got absolutely hammered by herbicides this summer. And there are other examples. Torrey's mountain mint, we found a population of that got sprayed as well. That's a globally rare plant. So this is a serious problem. And we've already started trying to work on this together with partners. So together with the Fairfax County Park Authority and the Department of Conservation and Recreation, we've been talking to Dominion Power to try to minimize this. It's accidental. They're not trying to kill the rare plants, but of course, there are costs associated with being really careful when you have, miles and miles of power lines. So we've had a couple discussions, and we're just getting going. So stay tuned. Invasive species, I don't think they're the #1 threat, but they are really important. Deep cut is a famous northern Piedmont prairie and Manassas Battlefield Park, and it is really getting invaded pretty badly by small grass. Arthroxon hispidus is the scientific name. So it's a problem. Invasive species definitely need to be addressed in these really high diversity sites. And there are a variety of mechanical and herbicides methods to control it, but I won't get into that. Urban development is also a big problem for these grasslands. It ranks right up there with herbicides. The earleaf false foxglove is a sad story. So it's now extirpated from Virginia, completely gone from the state. And it's the last site where it occurred was in a Prince William County Piedmont grassland that now has a housing development built right. There's another example, a recent example from Loudoun County. I think it was in 2018, where a high quality grassland was turned into a data center. And in both of those cases, I don't think seeds were collected. Maybe somebody could correct me on that. But I'm pretty sure there are no seeds of the early false foxglove from Virginia. But that's one possible intervention, a last ditch intervention. Conservation easements and protected areas are a much better way to deal with this. Talking to landowners, spreading the word, making them aware that they have something special on their land. These sites are not very big, and we don't need to set aside a huge area to make a big difference. You can see in the photos that most of these sites are really narrow little areas. And then the photo in the bottom left is a kind of a crazy solution. If all else fails, you can get a sod cutter and you can roll up the grassland and move it somewhere else. And that's been done successfully in Arkansas. Okay, now in terms of restoration and conservation actions, the original site is always the top priority. So these sites that we studied this summer, they are the reference sites for northern Piedmont prairies. They're really important because they show us what these communities are composed of. They show us what kinds of soils they occur on. They're a window into the past, and they really are priceless, and we have to do all we can to try to keep them intact. But having said that, there are ways that we can use other lands to benefit these plants, to give them a new home to live, and also to create key pollinator and bird habitat. And the three ways of doing that are meadow establishment, restoration of degraded fields, and converting forests to savannas. So for meadow establishment, if you take your typical Piedmont grassland, which is dominated by fescue and orchard grass with very few natives, and probably not that many native seeds in the soil either in the seed bank. In this case, you probably have to start from scratch. So you've got to kill those non-native grasses and convert it into a native grassland. You can use seeds from a local grassland if you're lucky, or you can buy them from a company. Restoration of a degraded field. So this really is restoration in the truest sense. So that word is kind of a loaded term because the extent and the quality of these sites over time is so poorly understood that it's hard to know if we're really restoring a site when we turn like a fescue pasture into a native grassland. But if you have a site that's about half and half, it's a degraded grassland with a mix of native and non-native plants. If you're able to give the natives a leg up, then that is restoration. So you may not have to plant anything, but getting rid of the non-natives and letting the natives take over can lead to a nice restored native grassland. And this is an absolutely gorgeous restored site in Fairfax County. Really beautiful. They've been burning it. They've been spot spraying the invasives, and you can see the hyssop leaf skullcap coming back, and the native St. John's worts, and it's really exciting. So this is what I hope we can create in some sites in Fauquier County, but there's nothing like it yet. And the third method is one that hasn't been tried very much, but this is one that I think is really exciting, and it's converting some small areas of forest to savannas. And in the top picture, this is a Powerline clearing in Culpeper County with a really diverse plant community in the Powerline and a scrubby oak forest next to it. And this is on a clay hardpan soil where trees don't grow very well anyway, and it's a very fire-prone area. So if you were to go in there and thin out some of the trees and leave the widely scattered oaks and also burn the site, the hope is that the native seeds in the seed bank would express themselves, and they would also make their way from the adjacent Powerline clearing into the new savanna. And you would end up with a really diverse savanna with all the grasses and flowers in the understory. It's still pretty much a full sun habitat, which is what these plants require. So this has been tried at Difficult Creek, with, which I think has been pretty successful. And at another site in the Piedmont, Chris Ludwig has tried this. But I think it'd be really cool to try this in a few other sites in collaboration with the Forestry Department. So I'm starting some conversations with landowners to see if anybody is interested in trying this. But I think it would be a really nice intervention. Okay, and in terms of seed mixes, so those of you who have heard me talk before, you probably heard me talk about how I'm kind of a purist, and I think when we're creating meadows in our area, it depends on what your goals are, but you know, I've really fallen in love with these Piedmont prairies. And for me, when I'm converting a fescue field and planting a meadow, I'm doing the best I can to make it as a good a fit to the natural community as possible. And so we're starting to work on this. Like I said, a lot of those species are not available as seeds, but a lot of them are. You know, the ones that are, most of them are not available as with Virginia genetics, so they're probably from another state, but that's still, I think, much better than planting species that are not even native to Virginia, or you know, species that really belong in the Midwest. So a lot of plantings in the past in the eastern US have used plants from the Midwest, which, you know, is better, definitely better, way better than fescue, but it's not recreating the Piedmont prairies. And so we've created a Piedmont prairie in a bag, we call it. And this is not species that we've collected. It's from 4 different seed companies, and it's 27 different species of plants that are common in Piedmont prairies in our area based on our surveys. And we still have some of that for sale if anyone is interested. But we were also working hard on propagation, so this has become my obsession now. My wife can tell you, and our volunteers as well. That's my fridge on the right, and it's completely full of seeds. Luckily, we have 2 fridges, one for seeds and one for everything else. So this year, we've collected about 80 species of plants in the area, and we're always careful to leave the vast majority of seeds in the wild, but there's still plenty of extra that we can take. We are keeping these seeds for seed mixes that we're going to use at Clifton. We're also planting seedlings that we sell to the public, and we'll be planting rows of seedlings as well at the Clifton Institute property to serve as future seed sources for these species that you cannot get commercially. So this is our small part of this project, and there are a lot of different organizations in the state that's being coordinated by PEC to try to increase the production of native seeds. And DCR is working hard on that as well. So maybe we can talk about that another time. Resources for wildflower meadows. So if you're interested in working on your own property or talking to somebody who's managing a property, there are a lot of resources out there. We are hiring a new staff member, a land management outreach associate, who will be doing site visits to properties to advise people on how to manage their land with a focus on meadows, grassland restoration. So we don't have that person yet, but we're still doing some site visits. So get in touch if you're interested in that. That will be a free service. The Natural Resources Conservation Service has funding available for meadow conversions, which is really helpful. They funded us at Clifton for our project. They also give good advice on how to do this. The private lands biologists are a fantastic resource as well for meadow advice. The Department of Forestry, if you have questions about prescribed burns or thinning your forest, they can advise you on that. And you can also hire them to do prescribed burns. If you have questions about how to control invasive plants, Blue Ridge Prism is an awesome resource. 3 main seed companies provide to projects in our area. So Ernst in Pennsylvania, Roundstone in Kentucky, and Prairie Moon in Minnesota. We are including seeds from all 3 of those companies in our Prairie in the Bag mix. And there are at least 3 native plant nurseries in the area. And I guess we've worked with Hill House and with Ursanga on projects here with locally collected seeds. And that's the total focus of Ursanga, is collecting seeds in Fairfax County and propagating those local ecotype plants. Okay, so to conclude, regardless of the role that humans have had in maintaining these habitats, they are really diverse. They're full of threatened species. They are critical habitat for pollinators and otherwise forested landscape, either forested or like a shorn landscape that, overgrazed pasture with minimal floral resources. They're important for declining animals. Powerline clearings are important, but threatened, and surprisingly important. So, like I say, we didn't expect powerline clearings to be so impressive, but they really are an amazing resource in the area. And in terms of conservation and restoration, most of the sites we studied are threatened in one way or another, and they need help. So we are starting to work on that, but we're always looking for partners in that. If you notice a site that you think is high quality and it's about to be developed, let us know, and we'll do what we can. Like I outlined, meadow establishment, restoration of degraded fields, and converting forest to savanna, I think can all play a role in this. And there's a lack of seeds of several important species that are found in Piedmont prairies. I'm losing my voice, so it's perfect timing. So I'd like to thank Gary Fleming and Johnny Townsend from the DCR. They have given us a lot of help with this project, finding sites and identifying plants. Quite a few private landowners allowed access to their land. Manassas National Battlefield Park and Fairfax County Park Authority both gave us research permits for this project. The project would have been impossible without the Virginia Native Plant Society, who funded the botanical interns this summer. We have quite a few other wonderful donors listed there and partners on the right. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to look at the chat here. It might be best to, I don't know, to call out questions, but let me see what we got here. Ooh, what dicanthilium was in the survey photo? Don't know. I don't like dicanthiliums that much. I'm still, it's an acquired taste. I'm still working on that. Have the results of the study been shared with the power companies? Yes. Like I say, we are working closely with Dominion, and we're also going to be working with Rappahannock Electric and probably Novec as well. So absolutely. Really, communication is critical with the power companies, because like I say, this is not like, they're not malicious. They're not killing these plants on purpose. The trick is really, trying to communicate with them to minimize the damage. Now I'm going to unmute Devin Floyd from the Center for Urban Habitats, or maybe he can unmute himself, because he might have some comments here as well. He joined us for the question and answer session, especially because I'm losing my voice. Can we get a copy of this presentation? We're recording the talk, and we will send you an email. Why would some sites not be affected by herbicide use? Well, I think the power companies are more careful in some sites than in others. And so, if you stand right on top of a woody plant on a little tree ceiling and you spray herbicide on it really carefully, that's not going to hurt these herbaceous plant communities. But that unfortunately is the exception. So usually these folks are really busy and they are spraying from quite a distance and killing a lot of plants that they are not intending to kill. One other solution is tweaking the kind of herbicide. There are some herbicides that are bud inhibitors, and you have to be really close to the plant to apply it effectively. So they're more expensive, but that's one way of forcing the applicator to be more careful. Devin, you feel free to chime in if you've got any ideas.
Can you hear me, Bert?
Yep.
Excellent.
Wow, lots of questions. This is great. I'm really excited about all the interest. Fescue to native warm season grass conversion with shortleaf pine savanna. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I think that fits in just as well. Yeah, sure. I mean, a fire tolerant pine. Did your surveys find any unplowed / never plowed soils? If so, how did they rank for species richness? Yeah, so we found quite a few that appeared to be unplowed, and I talked to our soil scientist about that, and she is really hesitant to assign a date on that. So how long ago were they plowed? It just depends on how the soil's weather. But quite a few of them actually appeared to be unplowed recently, but I did not see a pattern in terms of diversity. So sites that were plowed seem to be just as diverse as unplowed. And maybe I'll pass it to Devin on that. You encountered one of those.
Yeah, we've seen several examples in central Virginia where the soil column appears to be not mottled. That means the A and the B horizon transition is nice and smooth, which is evidence of it not being plowed. But they typically coincide with extremely shallow rocky soils that were not ideal for plowing. They were sort of avoided spots to begin with, probably. That's the hypothesis. But we have noticed a coincidence of reduced exotic species in areas that appear to also not be plowed. So the idea there is one that I think is still pretty hypothetical, but being researched, and it has to do with soil, fungal, and other pathogen diversity and integrity. If there's lots of integrity with soil pathogens, that supports the native assemblage that is adapted to that area a lot more. And so those things are extremely resilient. That's one of the concepts. But I think there might be a number of examples around the state. But determining the last time something was plowed, yeah, I think that's extremely complicated. Whether or not the site has been plowed, that's another ballgame. I think that can be determined. I think archaeologists do that on a daily basis.
Did you survey on grazed areas, and if so, did you see an impact on grazing presence and or intensity on diversity? So we did not include any sites that were being actively grazed or ones that had been grazed recently. I think that the typical way of grazing in our area is to graze it really hard, to plant fescue, which outcompetes the natives, and then to graze it really hard. And the fescue recovers from that, but the natives cannot tolerate it. So the typical grazing regime in our area may not be compatible with these kinds of habitats, but I am really hopeful that if we're able to use a low stocking rate and we move the cows at the right time, that we're going to be able to maintain these native grasslands by using cows and therefore have productive landscapes as well as diverse landscapes. And that's been done in the Midwest pretty successfully on native grasslands.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one, and I think the cattle can be a good surrogate for bison, for example. But you guys saw that chart earlier that he showed the exotic species importance on the column side and the number of native species on the bottom. When you put these vegetative plots in a cow pasture, what happens is the number of total native species plummets, and the exotic species importance value climbs extremely high. And so what we see in the data that we've collected in cow pastures and horse pastures and other heavily impacted and grazed areas is that you may end up with, 60 or 70 species in your plot, and let's say 100 square meters. but a great majority of them are going to be exotic species, and 1 or 2 of them are going to be dominant. So diversity is horrible, but that's what we tend to see everywhere we find cattle. Any domesticated animal seems to have that sort of impact in the current way people manage land.
Here's one. There are a lot of questions. There's no way I can answer them all, which I'm just thrilled by all the interest. But can private landowners negotiate with Dominion to take over maintenance of Powerline rights of way? Yes. And this is a theme that kept coming up. So Dominion, when they step on the scene, they are looking for woody plants. And so if they see a tree seedling that's like, head height, they're going to go for it, or even smaller. But if you are a private landowner and you're able to control those woody plants yourself, then Dominion is never going to see them and they're not going to spray. So, having some loppers and a little spray bottle of 25% Roundup, you go in and you take out the woodies and you do a little spray to make sure it doesn't resprout, and bingo. That doesn't mean that they're not going to do something else. They're probably still going to take their equipment and run over your grassland. They might have to change out the power poles and cause havoc, or they might plant fescue or God knows what. But at least with the herbicides, I think you can make a dent. And they are perceptive. I mean, they will pick up the phone. So they have biologists, they have regional managers, and so you definitely can work with these power companies.
Hey, Bert, that's a good question. I'd like to take a shot at.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Wallace asks, you surveyed 38 sites. Are there many more? And how big are the biggest sites? Do you find any really important candidates for conservation? And I know, Bert, you and your crew and our crew, we're seeing a lot of these things, and we've really just kind of plucked out some of the better ones we've seen. But we attempted to do kind of a drive around in a 7-county area in central Virginia, and we very quickly became overwhelmed. And we're estimating there are several hundred high-quality examples in every county, and some of them are small. But I will say that it appears that some are hiding in plain sight, and that means there's a dark thicket woodland that has emerged in the last 75 to 100 years in place of what might in fact be 1,000-acre grassland just sitting there waiting to be released. So when Bert's talking about breaking a forest, you're taking some of the canopy out and introducing fire, allowing a savanna to move in there, you're going to be doing a really big service to the land, to biodiversity at that particular site, because suddenly you're going to go from 50 species to 200 or 300 species at a site, and you're also going to allow that thing to head towards the natural trajectory that it probably spent most of its time in the deep past. And that's what all these pollinators need. That's what all the animals are adapted to. So I think the answer to your question is, yeah, there's a lot out there, and some of them are probably potentially huge, depending upon the financial end and the willpower and the resources of the restoration crew that's doing it. But I can't even imagine how many sites there are out there. There's some places that we just have to stop. We're like, okay, we got to come back to this in the future. Everywhere you look, especially in the really flat areas, kind of in the mid-spectrum between the fall line and the Blue Ridge. It's really something. It really gets me excited.
When a burn happens, what percentage of the resulting germination is native and how much is invasive? Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that really depends on what you're starting with. So one of the really bad weeds, a small carpet grass, if you burn in the early spring, it actually seems to help that nasty weed. But if you burn during the growing season, you're probably gonna knock back some woodies and make an opportunity for a lot of native grasses and flowers. So we've just passed 8 o'clock. Maybe I'll take one more. Let's see. Are there plans to replicate the study in counties further west, such as Buckingham, Nelson, and Albemarle? Yeah, well, that again goes to Devin, who's done a lot of work in Albemarle, at least.
Yeah, we're Bert and his crew are a little bit ahead and laying some good methodological groundwork, and we'll probably follow with that and expand in areas where it's needed. I do think Buckingham in particular is promising, has a really high density of extremely high quality grasslands and lots of rare species. The Torrey's mountain mint and a number of other mountain mints, really complex group of plants. There's a lot of them in that area. Nelson County is heavily impacted, Albemarle as well, because of historic land use. But yes, there will be more studies in all of the Piedmont counties of Virginia. We're going to work hard on that. Clifton Institute, a number of other groups are going to be working together to try to learn more about what these things are in all the counties, what they mean, what implications they have for conservation moving forward. So, but yeah, to be specific, we're undertaking a preliminary inventory of all high quality grasslands in a 7-county area in Central Virginia, of which those 3 counties are included. So Gail Gibson, that maybe that gives you some hope.
Yeah, and the idea is, you know, for Devin's team and our team to use comparable methods and to combine data sets. And that's, you know, we used 2 of Devin's plots in this presentation, 2 of the 38. And we're going to keep working together on learning about these sites and learning how to conserve them and restore them. So, yeah, so thank you all so much. If anybody would like to work with us on a property visit, if you need advice on how to manage your land, send me an email. And, you know, I may not be able to get to it in the next couple months, but as soon as we hire our new person, we're creating a list of people who are interested in advice, and we can help with that. Also, if you're interested in the seed mix and you'd like to try this on your land, feel free to send me an email. Oh yeah, and Devin Floyd is at the Center for Urban Habitat, so you can Google that if you'd like to get in touch with him on, you know, if you have a question down near Charlottesville. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bert. It's great.
Bert, thanks for having me, man. We'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for coming, Devin.